video, we will talk about customer due diligence. It is one of the important concept and it forms the basis of customer profile, which normally used by other department to understand the customer better and also understand all the transactions he or she is making is as per the account profile, or these transactions are unusual and that need to be reported. So let's understand what is customer due diligence. We also use a short abbreviation, that is CDD. Customer due diligence is the process of identifying your customer and making sure they are who they say they are. It should not happen. I'm telling the bank that I am Donald Trump and I'm the president of United States. But in actual sense, I'm another person with the same name, but I may not be the president of the United States. I may be a normal person, right? So it is also important for bank to identify their customer and also need to determine that they are the one whom they are claiming to be. It is performed on the customer to ensure that they are properly risk assessed before being onboarded. It is also important to assess customer basis different risk attribute. So it can be the profession, it can be the industry you are, uh, and the geography you're coming from, and what kind of product you are looking for. So all these high level attribute help bank to understand what kind of risk you may bring in for the bank. A sound customer due diligence process is one of the best ways to prevent money laundering and other financial crime. Let's also understand when is CDD performed. Establishing business relationship, when a customer comes to bank and want to open a bank account or want to get into relationships, this is where we would perform customer due diligence, would like to understand more about the customer before we initiate or onboard the customer. Existing client want to onboard another product. So it may happen I already have a bank account, but now I would like to have a credit card account with the bank. So while I'm taking another product and I'm being an existing client, so there would be a separate due diligence that would be required. So in this case, the due diligence would be from perspective of my credit history to ascertain what would be the credit level that can be assigned in my credit card, and also whether it makes sense to uh, to 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 give credit card to the customer while performing periodic review to ensure customer information is updated. We understand that when customer is onboarded, we segregate customer basis their risk profile. So it can be high, it can be medium, it can be low, and accordingly we periodically review their uh, due diligence or a customer profile. For high risk, we normally update or review the customer due diligence record from 6 months to 1 year. And for medium, it would be from for every 2 year we would review and update customer profile. And for high risk, it can be somewhere around 3 to 5 years, depending on bank and depending on the jurisdiction you are in. carrying out occasional transaction under certain circumstances. So it may happen that normally I make transaction within my country, and suddenly there is a transaction which I have made to another country. So it can be high risk country like Syria or Iran, or it can be to a low risk or a medium risk country like United States to United Kingdom or Australia. But these occasion transaction would need to be investigated, uh, because it may happen that particular transaction may not be in sync with the customer profile, or there may be a fraud or some scam due to which these transaction has happened. There is a suspicion of money laundering or terrorist financing. So whenever I'll make any suspicious transaction, uh, then that particular transaction need to be investigated, and my customer due diligence profile would be reviewed and updated. So it may happen that I may receive payments from high risk jurisdiction like Iran, Syria, Afghanistan, or North Korea for that matter, right? So that would raise question, and that may not be a usual transaction of my customer. So that would require some investigation, and CDD profile of my customer would require review and need to be revised. The financial institution has doubt about advocacy of previously opting customer identification data. So it may happen that I have provided data at the time of onboarding, but that data has changed. For example, at the time of onboarding an entity, so there were six directors uh, which I have shared with the bank. But over a period of time now, out of six, three have left, and four other directors have joined in. So all that discrepancy, all that ambiguity need to be removed, and the customer due diligence profile would require updation and revision. So now let's understand what are the main elements of CDD. Customer identification is one of the important element. Customer acceptance, transaction profile, risk rating, documentation, monitoring, and investigation. So these are the six main elements. So let's understand the first element, which is customer identification. So in customer identification, a full identification of a customer and business entity, including source of fund and source of wealth, would be required. So here, when customer is onboarded, the name, date of birth, address. Address can be registered address, address of area of operation, and a permanent address, correspondent address, mailing address, then date of birth in case of individual, date of incorporation in case of entity, a unique identifier like passport number, uh, driving license number, or in case of identity, it can be company registration number or a tax identification number. So whole set of data is need to be identified, and also these data pertaining to customer is verified through different sources. It can be third-party databases uh, like uh, like LexisNexis, WorldCheck, Equifax, and then few other databases that can be used. Then we can also look at independent sources like a regulatory website, company registry. But all those sources need to be approved by your individual bank before you use them and put to use. The institution should also ensure that there is a process in place to update and maintain current client information. So this is always a requirement. When we onboard a customer, uh, we take a lot of information from customer to understand their profile. And over a period of time, we also anticipate that there may be some changes which may happen, uh, like the address may have changed, the associated individual uh, who are working with the entity which is a customer of a bank may retire, may resign, may leave, and new individual would have come. The beneficial ownership or a ownership or a shareholding structure may have changed from the past. So all that information need to be updated, need to be revised, and that the process should be in place, uh, so that this information is available and is updated periodically. So let's talk about customer acceptance. So here we need to define, and we also need to define what are the explicit criteria for acceptance of a customer, right? So the criteria can be availability of documents, and then probably the risk associated with the customer. If customer is of high risk, it may not make sense for a bank to onboard or have a relationship with your customer. And even during the uh, during the phase of your relationship, during tenure of your relationship, if you find anybody having a high risk, then bank again can re-review the customer profile and then take the decision whether to continue with the relationship with the customer or end the relationship. In customer acceptance would also be a basis on which bank enter into a relationship with customer. So now let's look at the third important element of CDD. So that is transaction profile. Let's understand what is defined. So it is primarily development of transaction and activity profile for each customer, and profile should contain sufficient information to allow for review of anticipated versus actual account activity. So at the time of onboarding, normally the questions are asked from customer, maybe on the basis of the kind of transaction he is anticipating, the kind of cash transaction versus other online transaction he is anticipating. And it is also being seen. It is also seen that few bank may also go ahead and ask you if you would like to perform any cross-border transaction. If yes, what all geographies you anticipate to make transaction. So the transaction profile help bank to understand what kind of transaction they may anticipate or they may expect from customer. So if in future customer is receiving or making payment to high risk country, however he nowhere mention that he anticipate or he expect these transactions, so that would require investigation, and that would also help us to understand whether it's a usual transaction or whether it's a unusual transaction for the customer profile. Another important aspect is risk rating. So here the assessment and grading of risk presented by customer account relationship and factor to be considered when determining the risk. So lot of attribute come into picture when we create a risk profile of a customer. So it can be geographical risk, it can be client type, product and services, transactional activity, and then also geographic location. So no single factor alone should be used to determine risk. So here numerous factors should be considered when determining risk of a client. So now let's talk about the documentation. So here documentation of finding as evidence or to provide a record of actions performed. So it is always very important to document and to document all your finding, document all your evidence. So it is also said if it is not documented, it never happened. And all these documents normally help us understand the changes which we have seen in customer profile over the year, and also help other department to understand the customer profile. So now let's understand the last element of customer due diligence. So that is monitoring and investigation. So it is always recommended that that bank should perform periodic review. So it can be account and transaction based monitoring on the risk presented. So we already discussed basis the risk of a customer, if it's high, if it's low, if it's medium. The periodicity of account review may differ. However, basis the transactions or basis the unusual transactions which are not in sync with the client normal behavior, so that would require due diligence to be performed, investigation to be performed, to make sure that there is no money laundering or terrorist financing risk altogether. And here the investigation is performed on unusual customer or account activity where we see that the transactions are being made which is totally different from what a customer has initially told or has shared information. So this is all about like 6 main element of customer due diligence, and we should understand that CDD is definitely a very critical and important aspect of whole KYC process. This helps us understand the customer profile. This also help other department downstream to understand the customer and perform investigation wherever they see any unusual account activity. So it can be basis of the transactions, it can be basis of the changes in current customer profile, or it can be basis of various customer screening practices. So with that in mind, thank you so much for listening to me. You have a nice day. Bye.